Yes. It is 4:30, so it is time for our meeting to get started. Mr. City Manager, do you have anything for follow-up?
Your Honor, I do not. Thank you.
Does anybody around the Diaz have anything as follow-up from the meeting last week? Nothing appearing, then I will let you tee up the airport board.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Mayor, Council, good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. A number of weeks ago, as council is aware, the board, the airport board that is, came out with the notice that to the public that indeed the support for the application to the state with regard to the MRG program had been withdrawn. And of course, that created a sort of cascading result, if you will, of the county withdrawing their support and withdrawing the application. And of course, the city council expressed some concern about supporting the MRG application, wherein there was none with regard to the 400,000 that the council had committed. With respect to a number of questions that all of you had, it was suggested that perhaps we hear directly from the board and hear some of the insights that they may have pertaining to that shift in approach, if you will. And indeed, we invited them out tonight, and they're here with us, which we appreciate their being here. I wanted you to know also, however, in light of this context, that indeed we plan to come forward with an amendment to the city council pertaining to that $400,000 that essentially would deallocate that funding from that purpose and put it back into the fund from whence it came, which, if I recall correctly, was direct distribution. I can't remember exactly. Nonetheless, that amendment will make that clear so that 400,000 is removed from the budget and put back into its host fund, whichever fund that was. And so with that, Mr. Mayor, if we can turn the time over to the board president and the executive director, I would certainly appreciate that.
Very good.
Good afternoon. I'm Kermit Willie. I'm the current president of the Board of Trustees, the Casper and Natrona County International Airport.
Mr. Mayor, council members, Clinton, City Airport Director. I'm not sure if you want to ask questions, or my assumption is probably you want to know what changed from then to now.
Exactly.
Okay. So if you can, I'll kind of give you the background of what happened up to the airport board's meeting, where the board had decided to recommend withdrawing the application. We're actually recommending to the county to ask the state, because this was right before the state was going to consider the application for the 40% of the funding. I'll let Kermit speak for the board since he's the board president. So in looking at, as we have been talking to you and other people about the importance of the minimum revenue guarantee and specifically the service, you look at this as what the benefits the service provides and what the cost is. And either two things can happen. Either the cost goes up in relationship to the benefits, or the benefits change in relationship to the cost, or for both of them. So as we've been talking about the importance of what this does in terms of supporting business travelers and leisure passengers, and with that, the importance of having service to another hub to be able to keep prices down and so forth. What we were seeing is that there were changes, and most of the changes that I'm going to talk about was not changes under SkyWest control. Most of these are deltas, with the exception of schedule. So a couple things that happened. As we originally had the minimum revenue guarantee, it was based upon a 50 passenger airplane. And when we were looking at the cost and knowing that this is probably not something that was going to go away, we talked to SkyWest about a bigger airplane. So if you have a little bit higher cost to be able to operate, it's a bigger airplane, more fuel burn, but you have 76 seats to sell instead of 50. And that's what they did. So we thought, okay, well, with the ability to generate more revenue, even though higher cost, it was something that eventually was going to be able to decrease. What we were hearing then afterwards was that was going to change. What would happen with SkyWest, because of some of Delta's rules, and I can get into this, is they were going to go back to a 50-passenger airplane, but Delta required them to have 2-class configuration. So they would take a 70-passenger airplane, 70 passengers, which is really 66, strip out all the 50 seats, reconfigure it so that they had basically 2-class configuration, but they could only then sell 50 seats. So we're back to only having the ability to sell 50 seats, but having a more expensive airplane to operate. So that was one of the challenges going forward. The other one was the schedule. So for a period of time, we had a departure at 5:15 in the morning and an arrival back in Casper at midnight. And we talked to them about the change. If you live in Casper and you get out to the airport for 5:15 flight, that's an early morning departure. But if you're somebody coming from Converse County or further area, that becomes even more challenging to be able to get to the airport for that early flight. And the same thing is getting in at midnight. When you get in at midnight, if you're a business traveler, by the time that you get home, especially if you have a longer drive, it makes it very difficult to be able to do business the next day. So we saw that the schedule changed on the arrival back to about 10:30, which was better, but really no movement from the 5:15. So what we're hearing from business travelers is this is really the reason why we're not filling the planes. It's really not conducive to the business traveler as much as we wanted. And we're hearing from leisure travelers. We had a couple that talked to me that said, we fly to Salt Lake City to visit my grandchildren, but we can't get up that early in the morning. So that's just, I mean, an anecdotal. But we're seeing that, hey, this is maybe not with the schedule getting us what we thought, and maybe that's the reason why we weren't filling the airplanes. We also were looking at the fares, and while Delta sets the fares beyond Salt Lake City, you go to Salt Lake City and back it's SkyWest. We weren't seeing the fares being competitive with United, so we weren't necessarily seeing that fare pressure keeping the fares down with United. And then the last one is really, it's a kind of idiosyncrasy. Delta has rules in place that if it has more, it's either 4 or 5 hour connection, they don't show a flight as being available. And I'll give you the example. I flew out to Salt Lake City with some members of the Fly Casper Alliance right before the airport board met to talk about some of these concerns and to find out if there was going to be any delays. Give us something that we could go forward and say, hey, this is going to change. When I booked my ticket, it was the 5:15 in departure into Salt Lake City, into St. George, and then we're coming back from St. George into Salt Lake City. Then I got in about like 4:30 in the afternoon, but my departure back to Casper wasn't until about 10:30 at night. So because of that 6-hour gap, when I went to book my ticket, it shows it's not available because Delta doesn't allow you to do this. So for me, if I didn't know any better, they lost that revenue, they lost that ticket. But I knew better. And so what I did is I had to book a round trip ticket from Casper to Salt Lake City and a round trip ticket from Salt Lake City to St. George. So one worst case scenario, passengers who don't know this don't book because it shows the flight's not available. Best case scenario, if you know to book 2 different fares, you can do this. But if remember, we talked about the beyond revenue. If you fly from Casper to Disneyland or Orlando or whatever it is, that SkyWest gets part of the revenue from Salt Lake City to Orlando, even though they don't have any costs because they brought the passenger to Salt Lake City. But if you're booking from Casper to Salt Lake City as one fare and a separate ticket from Salt Lake City to Orlando, Delta doesn't know that when you originate in Salt Lake City, that you actually originate in Casper. So SkyWest is getting none of that beyond revenue. So worst case scenario, we lose that ticket. Best case scenario is SkyWest doesn't get all the revenue that they would be entitled to. So all of these things started to build up. SkyWest basically said, we don't see any of this changing. And I think at that point, when we met with the airport board, the easy decision probably would have been let aeronautics consider this. And if aeronautics was not going to fund this, then the decision would have been on aeronautics. But I think that, from the airport board's perspective, I think what the board was looking at is, what is the best thing to do to be stewards of the money and so forth, even though the money had been allocated.
And we as board members are appointed by the county commissioners. We basically work for them. And because the airport is so big and so complicated, it's not something that you can do as a side note. There's a lot going on out there at any one time. So factoring in the change in the schedule, the non-economic viability of running a 76 passenger plane with 50 passengers, we decided that it was time to just say we've done all we can. It didn't work out, and we have really no beef with SkyWest at all. They fly for us with United. If we're able to get somebody else in here, it's likely that SkyWest will be the operator. They're a very good operator, but that lake just became uneconomical. And so it was our board's decision unanimously that we would just tell the county, withdraw the application.
That doesn't mean that there's not value. Obviously, people still fly the service. My wife and I fly back and forth to Salt Lake City because she goes to University of Utah Hospital. So we're not saying that there's not a value there for the service. It's just when you look at the value for the service and what we thought that we were getting versus the cost for the service, knowing that the cost was probably at best not going to get any better, but potentially getting worse. And balancing that against United service, which has between 6 and 7 frequencies per day, that doesn't cost anything to operate. You look at the benefits, and it became continuing a challenge to look at, is this something that's going to be viable long term? Is it going to be something that's going to get better? And I think, as Kermit said, we were not seeing that getting better in the future.
Vice Mayor, I think you had a question.
Mhm. So everything that you gentlemen have said isn't anything different than what we've had as a concern over the last couple of years. And so when the ask came to us for the 400,000, we